So much for joining us. Thanks to all of you also joining us live for this show. Thanks to our presenting sponsors. You see their logos right in front of you. I like to say, please go find, like them, follow them, give them some love. They are not only for us in this conversation, but for you and the great work that you do across our nation. So they are really in your corner. They believe in you, your missions, and they're there to support you. Thanks so much to Julia Patrick for having this wonderful idea to start the nonprofit show. Julia is the CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and I serve alongside as a co-host. I'm Jarrett Ransom, your nonprofit nerd, CEO of the Raven Group. And you might have just heard that we have had Nicole on before. So Nicole Forsyth is us, President and CEO of Red Rover. Welcome back, Nicole.
Thank you. It's so great to be here again.
Nicole, you shared with us so many fascinating things at the beginning of the pandemic. Hard to believe that we're navigating through almost 12 months. And so we thought it might be a really interesting idea to have you back on, because when we were first talking about this, none of us could have imagined that we would be going forth for such an extended period of time. But also you were in one of those parts of our sector that I think a lot of people would say, do I do human services or animal welfare? I'm going to go to human services. So we were really concerned about the health of your organization and how you would navigate, what had typically been a very robust giving relationship when there was this new pressure put upon society, really. And so that's a big ask. I mean, I'm really interested to know how your organization has done different things, been innovative, weathered the storm. And at the very end, spoiler alert, we're going to ask you to get out the crystal ball and let us know what you think the future holds. So thank you for joining us.
Sure. Yeah, I think we were amazed at our donors and those who support us. Like, we were very concerned in the beginning when people were losing their jobs, and initially, we reached out to our donors, the ones we've had giving to us for a really long time, mostly just to check in to see how they were faring. And it was a nice excuse to be able to communicate with them because, we've got hundreds of donors, thousands of donors, but it's just nice sometimes to reach out and talk to some and see how they're doing. So we did that, and we were really grateful in the beginning to hear from them and say, some had to pause their giving, but others were increasing their giving. And overall, throughout this whole year, what we saw was an increase in giving. So I don't know if it was people who were just, maybe those who weren't affected as closely, maybe they didn't lose their jobs. And so I think there was like this impetus to, hey, I have my job. I'm so grateful. There's so much going on. I want to help. I want to give back. So I think there was more of that going on. And I did a little bit of reading with some other nonprofits, and it sounds like that was sort of similar. There's definitely certain sectors that saw an increase in giving. But I think that's also coupled with the fact that we were extremely relevant. And I think that's like a big message for nonprofits. If you are relevant to what's going on, you're going to get those donors and supporters because they understand and they see that relevancy and it's top of mind. So, not only with COVID and people were actually getting sick, we were there trying to figure out, can we help them make sure they don't have to relinquish their pets to an animal shelter by providing these boarding grants, by, giving them other resources, things that they can do so that they don't have to give up their pet. And so we were out there saying those messages. We didn't give out a lot of those grants though, but I just think the message of that we're there, that we can help, that we were sharing resources. We had a lot of things for people like, have you thought about what would you do with your pets if you needed to be hospitalized for a long time? And so I think those are the resources people were using. They didn't necessarily need to board their pets, but they were going to our website, learning these things about what would I do? Like, would I have a neighbor? Do I have a cousin, a friend, a sister? Who would take my animals, and what kind of agreement do I need to have with them? So that I think was really valuable. And then, our responders program where we go and set up temporary shelters for animals during natural disasters. We had all these fires happening like at the same time. Remember that in California? And we were like, but we had already committed. We are not deploying volunteers. We're not sending volunteers. It's too much of a risk to send volunteers into these situations. So we're like, how are we going to, what are we going to do? How are we going to help? And so we sent staff, because we do have most of our staff are trained in the responders program as well. And everyone's jobs had shifted. So the responders team that normally deploys the volunteers, they were busy doing other things. And some other staff had time that they could actually go and do some of these deployments. So we did that. We sent staff. We had a little bit more control over, where they were and how they managed those situations. So we felt it was pretty safe. And of course, they volunteered to go. It wasn't like we forced anyone to go.
Sure. Oh, sure. Sure.
And that was great. So we were relevant with those fires as well, being able to provide some expertise in how to take care of some of those animals. And some of them were, helping with burned bandages, replacing the bandages on burned cats' feet, and just, some really incredible things that we were helping with. So, again, we were relevant in that particular situation. So I think whenever you mentioned media, and I think whenever you're really relevant, you're going to get a lot more media attention, and sort of connecting for the media how you're relevant was really successul for us. We also know that domestic. Oh, go ahead, jump in. Sorry,
I want to. I know all these resources, phenomenal resources that Red Rover has provided. Like you said, we may not have needed the grant or needed these things, but we certainly needed to know, how do we think about what we need to consider when it comes to our pets, right? And that plays a big role in building that return on relationship, which is exactly what you did in the beginning of the pandemic. And you shared that was you simply had conversations to check in with people. How are they? How are they doing? Right. And then to provide these great resources.
Yeah, it was and it felt very natural to us, because, we do start from that place of like, how can we help? What is going to be helpful right now? Let's look around, let's talk to people, let's see what's happening. And we knew that the shelters in the beginning, we knew the shelters had closed their doors, but that people were fostering like crazy all over the country, which is phenomenal. We do know some communities did have a large increase in people surrendering because they lost their jobs and lost their homes or lost their housing. So we knew there was this need to, let's make sure we minimize that as much as possible. So I think that, we really do sort of step back and think like, how can we really be meaningful? And, teachers having to work remotely and teach kids in this new way. We also switched our education programs to be online and virtual, and set up a lot of resources and support for teachers and parents and kids too, so that they could learn about animals online while they're going through this pandemic.
So let's switch up, because you have an interesting alignment that not a lot of people would know about, and that's a connection to domestic violence. And I would love for you to talk about that, because as Jarrett has brought up time and time again with some of the work she's doing for other clients, domestic violence is on the rise. I mean, during this pandemic, it's really come forth with an alarming amount. And yet, because of the pandemic, shelter services and counseling and all of these services have been pulled back. Animals are stuck in the middle of that somehow. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So I think, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of it is about this manipulation and control. So you can imagine if someone's has an abusive partner, having the pandemic, having COVID as another means to control this person, keeping them at home, not letting them go out. You can imagine how that would lead to an increase in situations, in violence and abuse, because they're now stuck at home and they don't even have a way to go to work or anything like that. And you're so right. The pets are part of this, and they're part of it because of that manipulation and control. So in the same way that, the pandemic could be used to control someone, so can a pet, especially since it's private, it's in your home. There's kind of this understanding that like, you're not supposed to abuse children, and like, you're gonna get in trouble if you abuse children. But pets, there's a little bit more fuzziness, people can say, well, it's just a pet. So you can kick a dog to intimidate your partner, and they can be upset. But when they, if you get called on, if the partner gets called on it, it's just a dog, so it's a little bit harder to call the police and say, my partner is kicking my dog. They may not take that seriously. So I think it's even easier in a domestic violence situation for the pet to be part of domestic violence.
Wow.
So because of this, because their pets are used as this in this manipulation control, it's really important that they get out of this situation. If someone decides they finally are ready to leave this relationship, they need to leave with their pets, because if they don't, they will go back, because the pets will be used to control the person to come back. So we've got research on this. A lot of the domestic violence shelters that do take pets now have been tracking, when they leave with their pets versus when they don't leave with their
Right.
pets, and more go back when they don't leave with their pets. And so it's no surprise, from us in terms of common sense. It's like, well, yeah, the person's, on the
For
phone
the
saying,
family.
yeah, if you don't come back, I'm going to bring the animal to the shelter.
Mhm.
How many people wouldn't go back? If I had a partner who said, if you don't come back home, I am bringing your cat to the animal shelter, I would be like, of course I'd go back.
The threats that go in with that.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that happens. And so, for us, it's really important once we learn this to develop these programs to make sure the pets can get out. So we either can put them in temporary boarding, which is one of the grant programs we have, so the animal can go to a boarding facility and the person can go to a safe house, or we're slowly helping the domestic violence shelters become pet friendly. So they know it's an issue, they've seen the research, but as we mentioned, they're overwhelmed. They have such little funding and resources already. And a lot of people don't really have a lot of empathy for domestic violence survivors. So we're trying to change that too, helping them understand what it's like to be trapped in these situations. And the pets seem to be softening people's understanding of what it is actually like to be in this manipulative relationship. So, getting the domestic violence shelters to actually become pet friendly and have the pets housed there is our ultimate goal. And we are so excited. We have changed that statistic from roughly 10% to now roughly 17% allow pets on site. And we are planning by 2025 that 25% of domestic violence shelters across the country are going to be pet friendly.
Wonderful.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit because we have so many questions for you. I was telling you and Jerry, we were speaking before we started. I was really impressed from your website, the amount of media attention that you've had. And this is one of the things, I think probably because of my background, but there's been such a reduction of media posts on our nonprofits websites. They haven't been able to get that hook to the media unless they're health and human services or COVID related. But you all have done a really good job across the nation. Obviously, you're a national organization, but from small hometown publications to larger outlets, talk to us. What's the secret sauce in this?
I think mostly it is because we started this amazing corporate partnership with Purina. And this was above and beyond what I had ever dreamed was possible to do with a corporation, because they were in this heart and soul. To them, this was not just about elevating their brand, which they have done, by the way. So it's like win. But in terms of elevating their brand, they also really cared about this. They really wanted to make a difference in this space. And so they have been instrumental in, just making us get more awareness towards this domestic violence and pets issue. So we work with them, with their PR team and their communication team. So we meet almost weekly and discuss these things. So we have two major campaigns, and this year we're going to be having a campaign in May for National Pet Month, as well as October Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So two major periods where there's just going to be a lot of attention. They bring on board some celebrity endorsers. So we get some, people who are sharing this on social media. They have great connections with the Washington Post, and they can do paid spots. And they've got the PR team. There's no way we could afford to hire the sort of PR firms to really drive these things through. So that's been fantastic. But in combination with that, we also on staff have a public relations specialist. And I think that is critical if anyone is looking at developing these really robust partnerships with corporate partnerships. You have to have the capacity in-house to be able to build that relationship. And so having a really knowledgeable PR person on staff who can leverage this, work with them, but also get our own, use what we're getting with Purina to leverage our own media too. And so that's what we have. We have a fantastic public relations person. She's amazing. She's really helps this Purina partnership in addition to really driving the other kinds of media. And you mentioned like the local media. We have a magazine called Kind News Magazine, and that is national, but we focus on these kids who we call humane heroes. And there's a child who's done something really amazing for animals, whether it's raising money for an animal shelter or, getting a fire department masks for oxygen masks for pets, to have on the fire trucks, like these kinds of projects. We feature them in the magazine. And so what a perfect example of like, okay, let's have that person get media attention for that person's local community. So that's an example of a newspaper article, I think that's going to be coming out soon about this boy named Austin who raised money for an animal shelter. And, local media loves to cover local stories like that because they feel good, they're positive. And so those are the kinds of things that we find successful in the local markets.
Well, media insider tip. There are a lot of executive producers of news shows who have an actionable call to their teams to always end their 10:30, 10 o'clock news programs with an animal event. And so it's like, the squirrel that learned how to water ski or whatever. That's one of those things because you have such hard news all night long. And then you want to end but wait, there's something fun and a way to kind of chuckle off the air, as they call it. So, those organizations that do have some sort of good news to share like that, that's their opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we do have a lot of positive stories. We deal with a lot of difficult things between the animal abuse and domestic violence. And I think that's what was so amazing that like a company like Purina wanted to tackle this with us because it sounds like a pretty depressing topic, right? But it's not though. It's so funny to me because it's such a solution. People love to feel like they're solving a problem. So we don't go out there and talk about just how horrible domestic violence is. We say, look, here's a problem. We have an easy solution. You make it easier for them to leave and you make sure the pet goes with them. And all you need to do is make the domestic violence shelters pet friendly. And I've oversimplified in a pretty expensive program because it's not that easy to do that, but it's a solution.
Sure.
Yeah. Part and parcel to what you just said makes me want to ask you about what you just shared with us is really an education point. And the more that you educate your donors and your, potential donors and existing and old donors and all that, the more opportunity you have to get that support. And I'm wondering, how do you do that? How did you make everything from like Purina to not be afraid of some of these tough topics to, the local individual family in your community get involved?
Yeah, I think it really is because it is this positive message. And of course, branding always helps. So we call it the Purple Leash Project. So I think having a really easy, memorable name, Purple Leash Project, it's very clear there's a way you can help. So we have people who come to us, they become a monthly donor and they actually get a purple leash. And that has been an incredibly successful campaign. And I think the other part of the branding and the messaging is it's a super simple message. We're making domestic violence shelters pet friendly. So even if you don't know the research behind it or the barriers or how much animals play into domestic violence in pets, as soon as you say the sentence, the Purple Leash Project helps domestic violence shelters become pet friendly, you've just opened up everyone. They're all going, oh my gosh, I didn't realize they weren't pet friendly. That could be one where they start. If they've been in an abusive relationship in their past, they say, finally, someone knows that this is a big issue. I had to leave my pets behind and I never saw them again. Like, we've got a lot of donors who have that moment. Or they just think, oh my gosh, what happens to those pets in those relationships? I never thought about that. So it's just, there's many like aha light bulb moments, but they happen pretty instantaneous because the messaging is so simple. It's so clear. This is what needs to happen. And there's a very concrete way and a fun way again, domestic violence and fun don't sound like they should go together, but it's a great way to make it less taboo. You say, hey, I now have this leash that talks about domestic violence. I have Purple Leash Project. It's all over the leash. I can go walk my dog proudly and share that I'm part of this program and I'm part of the solution. And I think people like to feel like they're part of the solution. And so I think that's partly why it's been successful. And from just this last year, we doubled the number of these donors who donate to the Purple Leash Project, and we more than tripled our monthly donor Purple Leash donors. So it works.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yes, congratulations. That's huge.
That is enormous. Talk about the performance of your board. Jarrett and I have been talking to so many different organizations, and some boards have flourished, other boards have been challenged. Some boards have been like, let's hit the pause button and we'll meet up again, God knows when. Others were like doubling down, we're going to be more. I mean, what has been your experience?
Well, I think we're really lucky because we are a national organization. So we already were well set up to have board meetings remote. So we had been doing at least one board meeting remote. And I think actually right before the pandemic, we had kind of decided, hey, it's probably going to be easier on people. We get more people all over if we have even more board meetings remote. So that helps a lot. We were already well set up for that. And then, after our first Zoom meeting that was virtual, we also realized we could use the platform to increase participation. So we have some kind of introverted board directors that don't tend to talk a lot. And I've always been trying to think like, how can we break them out more? And we would do small groups in a regular board meeting. But I think with Zoom, knowing knowing me, I'm like, I am not going to talk because usually our board meetings used to go from 10 to 4, and we changed it from 10 to 3 with the virtual setting. But even that, I'm thinking to myself, I cannot talk from 10 to 3, like on a Zoom call, like I will go insane. So really breaking out more breaks and more breakout rooms to increase that time where, we're not just staring at the screen, we can actually change and do some small group talks. And after our first board meeting like that, the board directors seem to enjoy that even more. They're like, I feel like we get more out of our virtual meetings than we did in our in-person meetings, because we also would have sometimes a few board directors call in, but everyone else would be in the room.
Right.
And so the other thing that's been nice, both for those kinds of remote and in-room mixes with the board, but also with the staff, because we already had a handful of remote staff too that would be doing this. And so now everyone's on level playing field. Everyone's doing the Zoom. And that seems to have increased participation in a sense that kind of we're all in the same boat, which has helped, I think.
I think that's genius. And I think that's a really good comment because as we know, that is one of those things that is just a deal killer, because it concentrates the power into the few people that are, going to be there in the room and more vociferous. So, our time is almost up and it's flown by. And this is always the hard question. And that is, what are some of your forecasts? I mean, crazy 2020, still crazy 2021. What are you thinking? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, we're pretty optimistic. And I guess, again, that just goes with me. I tend to be optimistic, and I'm constantly like, just a little bit longer and just a little bit longer. But, we're pretty optimistic. We're hoping by the end of this year, we will be able to deploy volunteers again, hopefully before the fire season, kicks up again in California, and hurricanes and everything else in the Southeast is usually another hotbed of disasters that we help with. So we're hoping that we can deploy volunteers again by then. We're hoping that a lot of people will be vaccinated, and that might increase our ability to deploy. So we're pretty optimistic about that. And, also in terms of our donors, Purina is still this amazing partner. We're going to be going big with this. A lot of their brands, more of their brands are joining this. And so they're hoping in May that the aisles of the pet food stores, like the Targets and the Walmarts, will be all purple. It'll just be visibly purple. And so that's going to be amazing. Wow. Tidy Cats and Cat Chow and all these different brands are joining this. And so it's just gonna, we feel increase the awareness of this issue even more. So I feel like we're at a real tipping point. As soon as these domestic violence shelters feel like they can have a handle on this pandemic and they're not so overwhelmed, I think we're going to get more and more. The interest is already strong. Even with COVID, the interest to do these projects become pet friendly was already strong. So I think it's going to become stronger. We now have the support of the federal government too. The PAWS Act passed last year. So the first year of funding went through last year, and this year they've increased it a little bit. So now $2.5 million federal money for domestic violence shelters to become pet friendly. And we were part of that, helping with the PAWS Act Coalition. So that's also great to see that, there's this federal support for this program as well. And
I wasn't aware of that. That's new news to me.
yeah, and they, we talked to it. The money went to the USDA, but then they transferred it to the Department of Justice and Office of Violence Against Women. It kind of made a little path, which is just so federal. Like, I don't understand, but it got to where it needed to go, and they know why, and that's all wonderful. But it's just amazing to see how many applications were submitted, because the proposal was released in March, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was so worried that here we have this first round of federal funding. No one's going to know about it. No one's going to have time to apply. And they did. They had tons of applications. They granted all the money. So I was very relieved. And they also, I think, from their perspective, were like, okay, there's clearly a need, because we got these applications despite what was going on out there. So.
Right. Wow. Well, this has been great. I'm thinking, Jarrett, and I know that Jarrett has had a little bit, as we like to call, thaw problems on today's broadcast. So I appreciate you sticking with us and being patient. Jarrett, this is my pitch, and we need to get Nicole, but we're going to shame her on air. I would love to have her come back and talk just about the corporate partner relationship, and just to do an entire thing on that, because you have hit the mother load on this, and obviously it's really based on your talents and your staff and what you've been able to produce and provide. So I think this is a magical thing. I'm so proud of you, Nicole, to have the bravery and the wherewithal and the vision to really take something like this to this extent. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and we have written some stuff about this and have done so I would love to talk about it more. There's definitely a vision and steps. I would hate for people to think that just happened, because there's definitely a lot of intentionality that goes into setting this stuff up. And so I'd be happy to share our journey on that. It'd be wonderful.
We're going to hold you to it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. Well, here's Nicole's information, redrover.org. It's really a great website, something you should check out, whether you're in animal welfare, domestic violence, whatever. It's just, I really like the way the structure of the site is set up, how you make it approachable, how you engage donors and new visitors to the website. It's absolutely fascinating. And as we've been watching you since we first met you, it's really great to see you be so successful and to grow your organization. And we need to know this. We need to hear about this. We need to be inspired. And that's one of these things that I think Jarrett and I have been, so incredibly behind. And Jarrett always says, when we thank our sponsors, we need to make sure that everybody knows they're in our, they're supporting us. And that's what's really cool to see this work that you're doing being supported. And so we just love that. Again, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I've been joined by the nonprofit nerd herself, Jarrett Ransom. Thank you so much, Miss Jarrett. Another great show. We want to remind everybody that Jarrett and I have a very few open slots for anybody that wants executive coaching at a highly discounted rate. It comes through the nonprofit show. So you just need to reach out to us and mention the nonprofit show special, and we'll get you set up. Again, those sponsors, and we've talked a lot about the value of sponsors today and the partnership arrangements. We are incredibly proud of our sponsors, and we see the work that they do every day. So we want to make sure that we extend our thanks to them. Another great episode. Thank you so much, Nicole and Jarrett, for being with us. Been a great day. You go out there and make it another great day. And as we like to end every show, we leave you with our mantra, stay well so you can do well.